such a pleasure to be here at the launch of this new branch of the PSA. And I really am grateful that you invited me to contribute to the occasion. According to the latest figures available, every year, people in Britain will be spending £40 billion to hear someone speak. That is the scale of the value that we as speakers have to contribute. So what I'm going to be talking about is basically three things. How you find out what you can offer, what you can provide, how you can make it relevant, and then how you put it across. So let's deal with a couple of fundamentals first. Let's address the basic questions of who your speech is for and what it's for. This might help you to remember who the speech is for. I got the idea from a friend of mine who went to Tokyo. And in Tokyo, he found a lot of people in the street and in public places wearing face masks. And he thought they're protecting themselves from Tokyo's infamous smog. But when he made some inquiries, he found it wasn't so. They had head colds and had other ailments, and they were protecting others from their germs. And so I used the mask to illustrate that your speech should be for others and not for yourself. Does that make sense to you? But what is a speech for? Why do you make a speech? Why do you make a speech? The purpose of a speech should be to make change. Change in the thinking, attitude, or behavior of your listeners. And if you don't have a change in mind, why bother to make a speech? Now, it's important to get it right because there is immense power in the spoken word. During the Second World War, Churchill stiffened the resolve of this beleaguered nation through the power of his words. Ironically, he was facing a foe who similarly lifted his nation to European dominance through the power of his words. And more recently, Barack Obama, a man with little or no management experience, got the top job in the world through the power of his words. Let's consider how words affect you personally. Think about how you feel when you've been told off. Think about how badly you perform even ordinary day-to-day tasks when you've been scolded. And conversely, how much better you feel when you've been complimented. And how much better you perform when your spirits are high. In this year's Ryder Cup golf match between Europe and the United States, right in the middle of it, a former Ryder Cup captain, Nick Faldo, derided a European player, Garcia, for having been useless when he played under Faldo himself in 2008. You can imagine how devastated Garcia must have felt. He probably wouldn't have been able to play. But this year's Ryder Cup captain, Paul McGinley, immediately arranged to have a breakfast with Garcia, and he told him, "You're going out this afternoon paired with Rory McIlroy, #1 player in the world. You are a key member of our team. You always have been." Garcia went out with Rory McIlroy that afternoon, and they won their foursome. And the next day in the singles, Garcia beat Jim Furyk. That is the power of the spoken word. So it's very important to get it right because you can achieve so much with the right spoken words. In the year 2000, the Nichols State University of Louisiana conducted a study of the reaction times of 40 competitive tennis players. And they found a measurable decrease in reaction times after hearing a single negative phrase. And conversely, an improvement in reaction times after hearing something positive. Hearing something positive helped, hearing something negative hindered. That is the power of the spoken word. But what does it take to be a speaker? I want to get rid of a couple of misconceptions. One of the most common ones is that you need the gift of the gab. But having the gift of the gab is not the answer. It is not the only thing. It is something which helps to some extent, but it is not enough. So let me ask you this. When you address audiences, or when you prepare to address audiences, what is it that you think the audiences want to hear from you? They want to hear news. They want you to tell them something that enables them to have a broader understanding of the subject. And the S is for sensation. They want to feel good. They want you in some way to lift them. Inspiration is part of that. So news, something new, evidence, widen their knowledge, and provide a good feeling, sensation. Those are the things that people are looking for and expecting from you. So, what can you provide? When I met Patricia Fripp in America some years ago, I asked her, what do people expect from speakers like you? And she gave me a one-word answer. Wisdom. And somebody came up to me and he said, the last time I heard you speak, you told me something I've never forgotten. And it is this, what I've just told you, that the important thing is to transmit your take on whatever the subject is. Okay, now, how do you arrive at your take? Think of it like this. Think of yourself as a business. And this is how you would do it if you were operating a business. Consider that everything that you can offer can fit into a pint pot like that. Everybody else that's in the same line of business, everybody else who speaks about the same things as you speak, will have this much in common. And by the way, this is the representation of a pint of Guinness, as you will see in a minute. That much there represents whatever is common to everybody else in the same line of business as you. And most people, and most businesses also, try to become brilliant at that. But I call that being brilliant at basics. It's not enough. If you can't do that brilliantly, you shouldn't be in that business. Would you agree? So your attention should be focused really on the space above here. And here is where we put the differences that matter. Not simply things that are different, but the things that make people spend money with you and not with somebody else. Differences that matter. So you fill up this pot, but because it's a pint of Guinness, you will not fill it up to the very top. Because you've got to leave room for what? Some years ago, there was a controversy in this country about what constituted a full pint. And that is the reason why pubs overpour pints of lager and bitter. Can you remember that? Guinness objected. They said, you never overpour a pint of Guinness. Because that head is not only an integral part of the pint, it's the defining part. Because when you see a pot of black liquid with a white or creamy head, you know what? Guinness. So what is the one defining element of your message? Do you know what that is? If you don't know what that is, I urge you to start thinking about it now. In 2011, the singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen was honored in Spain for the poetry in his songs. And in his acceptance speech, he said, I was a little uneasy about an award for poetry, because poetry comes from a place that no one commands and no one can conquer. And he went on to say, when I was a young man and I hungered for a voice, I studied the English poets, I knew their work well, but I still didn't have a voice. By voice, he meant, I suppose, what you speakers would call the point of view. So that distinctive point of view that even defines you. He said it wasn't until he read the works of the Spanish poet Lorca that he knew that there had to be a voice. And he said Lorca gave him permission to find a voice. And he did eventually find his voice. But he said, I still didn't have an instrument. I didn't have a song. And so he worked at it. And he tells a story of how he found his song. And he found it in a 6-chord flamenco guitar sequence. And that became the framework for all the songs that he wrote. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because it is important for you not only to transmit the stuff that you know, and even your take on it, you have got to frame it in some way. Because then it belongs to you. And it is, that voice is your take on things, and it is the message that you have for your audience, for your public. And the song is the instrument, the vehicle. It is the way in which you put it together. You have to have something positive, something unique that belongs to you to say, and then you have to have a way of putting it across that also belongs to you. That is your voice and your song. Does this make sense to you or not? Yes? Good. Oh, good. I'm getting some good positive reaction from the back there. All right, so about a lifetime ago, I worked in newspapers. I was in the Evening Standard first, and I was in Daily and Sunday Express as well. The managing director of it was a larger-than-life character, a guy called Justin Stevens. He died 1 month ago. He went on to become head of English Heritage and a couple of other things. Justin Stevens is a man who would throw things out of the window. He would throw telephone directories at people and so on. He was a big character. One day I resigned. I'd been offered a job as a publisher of a magazine elsewhere, and I was on my way. And he sent for me, and he said, you can't go. He says, we are going to relaunch the Daily Express, and I want you in charge of classified advertising. I said, that's very interesting. What's the deal? He said, it's very simple. I want you to double the revenue in the first year, otherwise you'll be fired. I said, that sounds like an interesting challenge. Okay, I said, I'll accept it on one condition. He said, what's that? I said, you keep out of my way, because if it's my neck, I want to do it my way. So he said, fine, that's good, we'll do that. So, I had a look at what they've been doing to sell advertising so far. And what they did was to sell classified advertising as space. And I thought, this is not right. And they even talked about selling space. And I thought, this isn't right. Why do people advertise? They advertise for response. Who gives them response? Readers. So why are we selling space when we could be selling readers? And so I constructed an approach to selling advertising, which was based on the profile of the readers. We had these kinds of readers. Never been done before, selling classified advertising. Only in display advertising. Then I did something else. I said, it's no good simply publishing advertising in our papers and hoping that the readers will find it. So I did a major campaign to drive readers towards the job ads that we were carrying. Within 5 weeks, I had established a marketplace to rival the established market leader, the Daily Telegraph. It took me only 5 weeks. And I didn't double the revenue. I tripled it in 10 months. Why? Because I had a different take on the whole business of selling advertising. And then I took the salesmen aside and I said to them, I want you to have the answers to 5 questions before you go into any sales interview. And I'm going to share them with you because this is directly relevant to the way in which you prepare yourself to sell your speeches to your audiences. And as I explained, as I tell you what the questions are, or were, you can see for yourself how relevant it is to making yourself directly relevant to the people you're addressing. The first question was, why am I here? wasn't enough to say, I'm here because I was told to be here. You have to be clear in your mind as to what your purpose is. Why am I here? The second question was, why should he see me? Think about this. For whatever reason, you have been invited to speak to an audience, or it has been arranged for you to speak to an audience. So you think it's enough to turn up simply because you've been invited? Why should they listen to you? You need to know that, and you need to have the answer to that question on the tip of your tongue. The third question was, what can they get from me they can't get from somebody else? Yeah. The fourth question was, what do I want at the end? What outcome do I want? And the final question was, what's the least I'll settle for? So what's your fallback option? If you don't achieve the intended objective, what is the least you settle for? Because you've got to walk out with your tail up. So you've got to have something, some plan B, that gives you the opportunity to walk out with your tail out. Let me ask you this. What three things will people gain from hearing you speak? Could you write that down now? Now, I know some of you will struggle, and some of you are not even bothering to write them down, because you're going to find it difficult. Most people find it difficult, but if you don't know three things that people can learn from hearing you speak, you've got a job of work to do. So, let me ask you another question. What do you do? The reason I ask you that is because I wonder whether you have an elevator speech. Who's got an elevator speech? An elevator speech is what you would say to somebody who asks you what you do, very briefly, so that they will ask you to tell them more. And it is a mini sales pitch. It therefore must follow the principles of selling. And this is my take on the elevator speech. It's not the only one, it's not the only valid one, but this is my take. May I explain it to you, and then you can see if it's something you can pick up for yourself. Okay, there's three parts to it. The first one is to establish common ground by mentioning a problem that they can identify with. You say, you know how such and such a problem exists, and they nod their heads. You're on common ground. You then explain the consequence, which means that it is always important to explain the consequence. When you're selling anything, you establish a problem, you talk about a problem that they might have, you talk about the consequence of that problem and of not solving that problem before you offer your solution. If you go in saying, this is what I do, this is how I do it, and so on, that is one of the reasons why business presentations fail. If you go in saying, this is what we do and this is how we do it, first of all, without establishing what the problems are and what the consequences of that might be, you will fail. So if you are asked, what do you do, please think along these lines. Start with a common problem people can identify with, explain the consequence, and then explain how you provide the solution. So if, for example, you were to ask me the question,
what do you do?
I feel like a dentist. You know how some people are scared stiff about speaking in public, and others make presentations that are really boring, which means they don't give the best account of themselves. But I help them to speak without fear, and in a way that makes others want to listen to them. Do you see how easy it is? So I recommend that you follow this or something very like it to construct an elevator speech that gives you the opportunity to connect more fully with the person you're addressing. So, and I mentioned at the start the gift of the gab as being wrong kind of thinking. Here's another one. And this is the reason why probably 80% of business presentations fail, and most speeches also fail. And there's the belief that communication is transmission, that you simply deliver your stuff. If you believe that, you will fail. Communication is not about transmission, it is about the way you are received and understood. Even if you're stranded on a desert island and you happen to have a bottle with a piece of paper and a cork, you pop that into the waves, how effective is your communication? It's not until it's been received and understood. If it arrives in Japan and you've written in English, you still have to wait for the translation. So until it's been received and understood, the communication doesn't work. Does that make sense to you? Do you agree with that? Yeah? So when you're putting together what you consider to be your important message, think in terms of how it will be received. Think in terms of how it will be understood. Think in terms of how people can use it when you've done. What you think you are transmitting may not be what they are receiving. And you've got to understand that. And now let me just show you a couple more things about how people listen. People can think at about 500 words a minute. I'm now speaking at this moment at about 150 words a minute. This is me. I'm on track 150 here. I'm taking you from here, from where you are, to where I want you to be. Your brains have a surplus capacity of more than double. That's not going to remain dormant. There will be thoughts intruding, even sometimes something I say that you don't understand, don't agree with, or simply need to process. You will be driven out into track 350. Now, you'll come out of the track into track 350 from time to time. Of course, you'll come back because I'm making the most noise in the room, but you missed a bit. Now, if I'm trying to take you from where you are to where I want you to be, that's a sales pitch. That's a process of persuasion. And the more frequently that gets interrupted, the less chance of success. What you have to do is to recognize, first of all, that this is going to happen. This will always happen when you're speaking. You have to, first of all, recognize that, and then you have to learn how to cope with it. And the way you cope with it is to loop back and let people catch up. Now, something else, though, something else that about the way in which information is received. We've got three brains. I got this from a brilliant book called Pitch Anything. And he said, you've got the primitive brain that he calls the crocodile brain. And this is about the fight-flight defensive mechanism. Around that, you've got what he calls midbrain, but it's actually the limbic brain. And this is about how you deal with social issues, how you feel about things. There's no language, there's no reasoning there. Then you've got the neocortex on the outside, and that deals with reasoning, logic, language, and so on. Now, when you construct your case, you made it very logical, it holds together, and you transmit that. The receiver passes the information through these three brains. First of all, the primitive brain gets it, and it has to decide, is this a threat or is it okay? And it passes through only probably about 10% of what you've transmitted. It gets to the midbrain, the limbic brain, that decides, does this feel okay? Before it reaches the neocortex, where they start to process it in a logical, rational kind of way. If you don't recognize this, you probably think that because it started here in your neocortex, that that's where it's going to be processed initially or altogether. You think that it transmits from your neocortex to their neocortex. It doesn't happen that way. Even here, in this room now, the things I've been saying to you, you have been processing it by asking yourself, well, do you like what you're hearing? Do you like the way in which it's being said? It happens to all of us. But you have to know that this is going to happen, and you have to take account of that. And that is why you had so many different interpretations. Because your brain, your neocortex, was getting in the way of what you were being told. And Lubna didn't tell you certain things. For example, she didn't give you dimensions. She didn't give you positioning on the page. Details which can be very significant. And there's some people who are very left brain and they say, if I don't know that, I'm not going to get it right. And there are other people who are much more right brain and they say, it really doesn't matter, I've more or less got it there. But you see how there's room for so much difference. And therefore, the success of your message will be largely conditioned by or influenced by how that process goes. Now, I mentioned sales pitch. This is how persuasion works. You have to assume that when you start, your listeners are not really interested to you in what you're saying. So you've got to take them from where they are to where you want them to be. This is how it works. Assume that they're getting on with their lives quite happily here. You've got to say something initially to grab people's attention. And that'll raise their interest sharply, but usually not enough to reach the buying level. This is the buying level here, the red line. So you've got to tell them more stuff and construct it in such a way that it takes them to a point well above the buying level where they say, I like this. That's the point of desire. And it has to be well above the buying level because you have to reveal at some point the bad news, which is the cost. Not just a financial cost, there's an inertia cost. I've always done things this way, why should I change? So when you reveal the cost, interest can drop a bit. If it doesn't drop too far, you kick it up again, and this is where you can ask for the commitment. These are the 4 steps. A for attention, I for interest, point of desire, and here is the action. This is how people buy. This is how you buy. And if you want your message to be accepted and recognized by people that you're addressing in your audiences, this is what you've got to do as well. You have to recognize it has to follow this kind of sequence. So finally, let me just say, let me urge you to treat every speech as a great opportunity to make an impact on other people's lives. You who have chosen to be speakers, you who have chosen to develop the skills of public speaking, you who have chosen to stand regularly in front of audiences, you have a great opportunity to influence the lives of those who hear you. I ask you not to make great speeches. I ask you to make every speech with great care, because then you will be memorable and then you will be remembered.